week after week to hear, I don't know, lousy Bible teaching presented poorly. I'm grateful, Lord, every time I see folks walk through the door. It warms my heart because, Lord, there's a whole world of sin out there every Friday night that we could be partaking in. We could just be sitting at home in air conditioning, watching TV. And, Lord, you bring folks out together because these folks want to study the Bible. They want to, get together collectively and learn about you and get closer to you. And Lord, I'm so grateful for it. And, God, I do want to ask you, please, guide and direct everything that will be said and done here this evening. And, Lord, as some of us have, again, had a difficult week, we got friends and family who are sick. Some of us are celebrating because big answers to prayer this week. Lord, some of us are going through a hard time and praying for answers to prayer because we don't know what to do. God, I pray that you will speak to each and every person out there and help us all to hear your guidance and direction and do your will. And Lord, please help us to be a better Christian when we leave here than when we showed up. Help us to be a little bit more like you. Help us to stand up against the world and the pressures from the world and the devil. Help us to live righteous and obedient lives. Help us to be good, obedient Christians. Lord, help the men to be good fathers and husbands, and help the ladies to be good wives and mothers, and help us all to be good Christians and employees or employers. Lord, we just need a lot more of you and less of us. We love you, and in Christ's name we pray. And all God's people said, amen. All right, so with that, did you hit record yet? Oh, you weren't supposed to. We do it after we pray. Yeah, it's all right. It doesn't matter. Yep. Can you hear it coming in? There's an echo? Nick, you want to, what's that? Yeah, let Nick back there. Let him take a look, see what's going on. So, okay, everybody, with that, we are going to jump in. We're in Matthew chapter 14, and with any luck, we're going to get through it. This chapter does move along a little bit. We're basically going to go over three stories. We have the story of John the Baptist and his execution. We have Jesus feeding the 5,000, which is I don't know why they call it that. It's more like 10 or 12,000, and then we have Jesus walking on the water on the Sea of Galilee, which again should be called a lake. And that's pretty much what we're going to get into. I think I'm going to stop short of the last two verses in the chapter, just because those last couple verses there's a lot in there. There's something really neat that we're going to go over, but we have to tie it in with some scripture, and I don't know if we'll have the time. So we'll see how far we get. All right, so let's read verses 1 through 12. And then we'll jump in. So follow along with me as I read Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 12. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. And when he would have put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them, and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given to her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison. And his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. All right, so that is the story of the execution of John the Baptist and how that unfolded. And what we're going to start with is we're going to go over a brief explanation of the name of Herod and the family tree. Now, if you have read through the Gospels one time, and the book of Acts, we'll throw that in there, you've read the name of Herod 100 times. And if you have read that name and you're confused as to who the guy is, where he came from, what he's doing, and how the family tree works out, join the club. Because it is not easy to sort through all this. So we're going to just briefly go over the family tree of Herod. So the name Herod is a family name. So once in a while in the Bible, it will say Herod, but it will not give a title, and you are left to wonder, are we talking about Herod the Great, his kids, his grandkids, going on down the line, or his great-grandkids? So all of the Herods were from Idumea. Does anyone know who the Idumeans are, where they came from, how they came about? When I say Idumea, what does that make you think? Think, Patrick, you're making up names. Okay, so when you think of Idumea, it is Idumea. It's transliterated, so don't tell me that I spelt it wrong. When you think of Idumea, think Edom. And with Edom, we're thinking of the Edomites. And the Edomites come from who? They live down here. And then what happened is at a certain time, they moved up to here. Anyone know where the Edomites come from? Okay, so we got to go all the way back to the book of Genesis to the twin brothers, Jacob and Esau. So Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes, the Israelites. His brother Esau is Edom. And when we go back to Genesis, it explains this. So Edom is the father of the Edomites. So to give you an idea, out of all of the enemies of Israel, if I were to ask you to list the enemies of Israel and you just started shouting out names, most of the time people will not bring up the Edomites, even though they are one of the oldest enemies of Israel. And more is written about the Edomites than any other enemy of the nation of Israel. The Edomites were an enemy of Israel from really when Jacob was first born. Him and his brother were having trouble together. Now, the big thing that happened was when Jerusalem was surrounded in 586 BC by the Babylonians, the Edomites were cheering on the Babylonians to kill all of the Jews, to the point that when the siege was laid and the Babylonians made it into Jerusalem, groups of Jews escaped and made their way south and made their way down to Idumea in order to escape and seek refuge with their distant cousins. And we read in the Bible how the Edomites captured the Jews and brought them up and turned them over to the Babylonians. And when the Babylonians were surrounding Jerusalem and slaughtering all the Jews, the Edomites were cheering them on and cheering them on in so much as to say, grab their kids and smash their heads against the rocks. Oh yeah, it was horrible. So then what happens is, even though the Babylonians go to Jerusalem and they take away the Jews all the way down to Babylon, I didn't bring my map of the whole Middle East, so I wasn't thinking I was going to talk about half of this. The Edomites said, hey, there's some good real estate here. We need to get up in there because all the Jews are gone and we can take over this nice real estate. Because you got to remember, what you have down here is Egypt, you have the Mediterranean Sea, Up north is present-day Lebanon and Turkey. And in Turkey is going to be a little later on is Istanbul. And you keep going further west, you have Italy and Rome. And this was a major trade route. As far as land goes, this was a trade route, and whoever had this land had a lot of people passing through it, so you could make a lot of money. And even though Jerusalem was destroyed, Hebron was not touched. So the Edomites moved in and made Hebron their capital, and they remained there. Now, on to the family of Herod. None of Herod's family were Jewish. They converted to Judaism at some point in order, whether they meant it or not, or it was a political move, doesn't really matter. But what you got to remember is they are not in any way considered Jews. When the Romans came in, they appointed Herod the Great. So it started with Antipater of Idumea, his son Herod the Great. That's the first one that we see in the Bible. Herod the Great was the one who gave the order to kill all of the babies in Bethlehem from 2 years old and down. So he made an attempt at the life of baby Jesus. When the Romans came in and they put Herod the Great in charge of Judea, they thought to themselves, Jews, Edomites, they're all the same family, this should be fine. And they put Herod the Great in charge of this land. The Jews did not see it that way. They were not happy. They believed that the Romans put in charge of their land an oppressor. Okay, so Herod the Great had more sons than these 5 that I put up here. These are pertinent. I believe that Herod the Great had 10 wives, only 4 of which are, pertinent for our family tree, and I didn't list any of them because I just didn't want this to go on forever. So he had a son, Philip, and that's Herod Philip. He was the first husband of Herodias. Herodias is the granddaughter of Herod the Great. One of his sons had King Herod Agrippa I and his sister Herodias. Herodias married her father's brother, her uncle, Herod Philip. Now this scene, don't get surprised, it gets way worse. But this was in vogue at the time. This stuff happened all the time. Herodias, who married Herod Philip, and by the way, there is also Philip the Tetrarch, so Herod the Great had 2 sons named Philip, if that doesn't help when you're sorting out the family tree. Herodias and Herod Philip had a daughter, Salome. Salome is not named in the Bible. She is named in extra-biblical history, but she appears in several of the Gospels. She is the one in the story that we just read danced for Herod Antipas and then requested of him that he would kill John the Baptist. So that was the lady who danced at the party. Her mom was Herodias. Now, what happened was that Herodias, for whatever reason, left Herod Philip, and she married her second husband, Herodias Antipas. The brother of Philip, also the brother of her first husband, also the brother of her father. This is where John the Baptist tells them, this is not okay. This is an abomination. You can't do this. And that is why Herodias was mad, because John the Baptist was condemning publicly her second marriage to her uncle. So when Salome went to dance at the party for Herod Antipas, her mother instructed her that when your dad tells you he will, bestow on you a gift up to half of the kingdom, I forget what he said, but that's usually what they say. What I want you to tell him is, we want the head of John the Baptist. Okay, we want this guy dead as an act of revenge. To round out the family tree, the grandson of Herod the Great, King Herod Agrippa I, he was the one that arrested Peter in Acts chapter 12, and then later in Acts chapter 12 executed James. James being the brother of Jesus. And I think that's as far as I really probably need to go. Any questions on any of that? All right. It's a mess, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So, yep. A lot of incest. Archelaus? No. Nope. Didn't mention him. Didn't really mention him. We could go into the family tree more, but think of this. When you think of the name Herod, think evil, bad, wicked, horrible, enemy of the entire nation of Israel. And also remember, they are Edomites, and they are from Esau. I think that's how they spelt it. All right, that's all I got for you. Now I'm going to give you one more thing, and this is just a neat idea. Where do we read about James being executed? We read about it in Acts chapter 12. When did it happen? Happened in 62 AD. What does that tell us? Why is that important? Where do we not read about the execution of the brother of Jesus? We don't read about it in all four Gospels. What does that indicate? The Gospels were done being written prior to 62 AD. There's great debate as to when they were written and when they were finished. The point I'm saying, or the point I'm trying to make, is that that's a pretty important event. And it wasn't mentioned in any of the four Gospels. It is mentioned in the book of Acts. You would think that when the brother of Messiah was executed, it would have made the papers, so to speak, but it didn't. So that's one of the reasons that we believe that all the Gospels were completed before that. All right, any questions on that? And we're going to move into Matthew chapter 14. I know we almost started it. Mason.
Did you make the argument that because the Bible is entirely about Jesus, because Enoch is one of the most influential people in the world, and he mentions like 6 times in the Bible, like, he didn't even die, God just took him. Like, it's pretty awesome, but you hear almost nothing about him, because the Bible is solely about Jesus. So could you make the argument that it's not relevant because it's not relevant to the story of Jesus?
Absolutely. I'm not saying that the Gospels were written before 62 AD. I'm saying this is one of the reasons why we would make the argument. That's it. Because it was brought up. It was brought up in Acts 12. Obviously, it was important. But it's just, like I said, there are plenty of ideas in the Bible that we don't have concrete evidence for. So we try to put together the clues we have. That's one of the clues. Doesn't mean anything. All right, verses 1 and 2 in Matthew 14. Herod believed that Jesus was the resurrection of John the Baptist. In verses 3 and 4. Okay, in verses 3 and 4 of Matthew 14, you ever hear someone say pastors shouldn't talk about politics? You ever hear that? Pastors shouldn't talk about politics. Pastors shouldn't talk about the government. Well, read your Bible. Okay, John the Baptist had no problem commenting on the immoral behavior of a politician. It didn't go very well when he brought it up, but my point is they talked about it. It was part of their life. So, okay, in verse 5, we see that the government feared the people. Yeah, realistically, that's the way the government is supposed to work. The government is supposed to fear the people, the folks that they work for. But the important thing to notice is that the spiritual state of the people changed the minds of the politicians. That's what we see in verse 5. The people of the country all believed that John the Baptist was a prophet, and the political leaders were concerned. That gave them pause when they thought to persecute John the Baptist. Now, something else that we should all remember and think about, the world rejected the king. When he showed up, they rejected him. So in the same way, they're going to reject the messengers of the king. They're going to reject the followers of the king. Don't ever get down, don't ever be upset because people don't like Jesus, people don't like you because you like Jesus, people make fun of Jesus. That is the way it's supposed to work. Him, they're going to reject his message, they're going to reject his word, they're going to reject his prophets, they're going to reject his followers. In the same way, John the Baptist, okay, he ended up having his head cut off. Skipping on down to verse 12, what did they do with the body of John the Baptist? They buried it. I bring that up simply because every time one of God's own dies, they get buried. If God mentions it every time, it seems important. Okay, let's read verses 13 to 21, and we'll get into the story of the feeding of the 5,000. When Jesus heard of it, they're talking about Jesus heard about the death of John the Baptist, who, keep in mind, was his cousin. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart, and when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, This is a desert place, and the time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. But Jesus said unto them, They need not depart. Give ye them to eat. And they say unto him, We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He said, Bring them hither to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children. So this is called the feeding of the 5,000. There are 2 events where Jesus does a similar miracle. This is the first of the 2. We're going to read about the next one in Matthew chapter 15. So in verses 13 and 14, it seems like Jesus was trying to get alone to mourn. After all, his friend, his family member had just died. He not only died, he was executed by a tyrant. Jesus was obviously upset, but the people followed him. And Jesus had compassion on the people, and he healed their sick. Now, in verse 15, and this is comical to me, I find some things to be funny in the Bible. Not everyone, sees it the same way. The disciples noticed that the people were not leaving. And if they wanted dinner, they should head on into town because it's getting late. And they say to Jesus in verse 15, Jesus, why don't you send them away? They're not going to listen to us. They don't notice that it's late and there's a lot of them. Okay, clearly we are not prepared for this. You can't just so can we stop calling them 5,000 people? How many people you think were there? It says there were 5,000 men. There are women and children. 12 sounds like a great number to use, Ed, right? 12,000, okay? So we clearly have a... Have you ever been in a crowd of 12,000 people? Hey, what do you need if they all get hungry? You don't need a dozen pizzas. You need semi-trucks full of food. Do you know how much planning goes into a party of 50 people or 100 people? We're talking 5 figures, over 10,000 people. And the disciples are like, nobody told us that we had to feed these folks. And they're not leaving, so Jesus, tell them to go. Jesus responds, it's not necessary. They don't need to go. Now, the disciples didn't pick up on this, and I think Jesus is telling them, look, something special is going to happen here, but they didn't pick up on it. In verse 17, they answered Jesus, look, we have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. As if to tell Jesus, I don't know if you're aware of what we brought to eat, but we don't have enough food for the 13 of us. And there's 10 or 12,000 more people. They start to explain to Jesus why it's not going to work. Jesus notices that they don't have 100 food trucks ready to serve these people. And he says, don't worry that it's late, just you guys feed them. And they totally miss the point. They say, no, I don't think you... I don't think you get it, God. It's not going to work the way you think it should in this case. You ever say that to God? God's like, hey, don't worry. Just have them sit down and we'll feed them. And you start to explain to God all the logical, practical, rational reasons as to why your situation is special. Can't just rely on faith this time, God. We don't have enough food. I imagine that God gets sick of hearing from us all the reasons why His will cannot work out in our lives. Let me help you. One day, you will call me because you want to talk to me about something. Now, you will regret making that call. But you will bring up some situation, and I will give you an answer that seems completely worthless. It's impractical. It's out of the Bible, but that doesn't matter. When that day comes, save yourself the time of explaining to me all the reasons why your situation is special, and the Bible doesn't apply to you in this case. Because I don't care. Now, God doesn't care either. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, God is laughing. I mean the kind of laughing where your stomach hurts. You ever laugh like that? Okay, I sent at least one or two of you a picture earlier in the week because I was on my... So I leave my house and I'm driving west on Patterson, and I get to that new circle they're putting in by the Maverick and the post office in Palisade. And almost every day, I look over, and my teenage son waves at me because he's working for the concrete company that's putting in concrete. And on my way home, I see a guy who drove his car into the wet concrete. I pulled over, and I was laughing so hard I thought I owed him money. I could not stop laughing. It was the funniest thing I'd seen in weeks. I got out and was taking pictures and sending them to some of you so that you could laugh at this guy. He had to run over a dozen orange cars to get to the wet concrete. And he did. He was in it. It was hysterical. That's the kind of laughing God does in heaven when we tell God that his word is not applicable to our lives because we're special in these ways. That's how hard God is laughing. Verse 18. Jesus tells the disciples, just forget it. Just bring the people to me. Yeah, I think the disciples should have picked up on the idea that a miracle was coming at this point. And in verse 19, okay, this is interesting to me. This has nothing to do with the story, but God put it in there, and I thought it was neat. How do we teach our kids to pray? If you tell one of your kids, I don't care if they're 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old, hey, it's time to pray, what do? What do? Yeah, you usually, right? They fold their hands in some way, okay? What else do? Bow their head, close their eyes. How does Jesus pray? Opens his eyes, looks up to heaven. I just find that interesting. Jesus opens his eyes and looks up to heaven. We all teach our kids to close their eyes and bow their heads. Now, I know why we do it. We're hoping they will be quiet. Okay, but it's just funny to me. We're doing it wrong. So Jesus prayed for the food. He handed it to the disciples, and they passed it out to the people. It says that Jesus divided up the food. 5 loaves, 2 fish. I don't know how big the fish were. I do know how big the bread was, okay, because the Hebrew word used here is not, we're not talking about the world's largest muffin, okay, we're talking about these tiny little, the kind of like banana bread, loaves that you'd give away, not something massive. There wasn't a lot of food. He divided it up, and he gave some to each one of the 12, and he said, you guys pass it out. That's what he did. My point is, how much food do you think each disciple got? Right? It was a very small amount, divided by 12 guys. And he says, feed the people. And they didn't argue. They already told them how much they had. He was aware of the situation. So they're going to start handing this out. I imagine they had the same standard of food service that we have today. So, they had it in a food grade dish and put on their, latex gloves. And they started walking around. Now, when they were done, they gathered up the fragments in baskets. I'm assuming they handed it out in baskets. I have no idea. And I don't know what this looked like, and the Bible doesn't describe it. But what I do know is every time they reached into the bowl or the basket or whatever they had and pulled out food, there was more in there than the last time they pulled some food out. And I don't know if you've ever seen 10 or 12,000 people go through a line at a potluck, but it takes forever. This wasn't a quick ordeal. And all the people were sitting down, and they walked around, and they were handing out this food. And the only thing that we're told is that when they were done, the people asked the disciples for a doggy bag. They were leftovers. And they gathered up all the stuff that was left over. And all we know about everything that was left over is that there was more left over than what they started with. Each disciple had a basket full of bread and fish. Each disciple was holding physically more than they were able to all put together at the potluck. Oh, yeah.
Like the first two, you're like,
Yeah. Yeah. They're like, all right, you're first. Here you go. Oh, well, there's enough for you, too. Oh. Now, you ready for this? The Bible doesn't even say that the 5,000 people knew it was a miracle. The only folks that we know knew it was a miracle were the 12 that were handing out the food. Now, you would think that someone noticed, right, that they had 5 baskets. How big was the basket, right? So if that's all they have, we would think that we noticed they weren't going back to the kitchen to fill the thing up. But maybe the people were just hungry and they were just happy to sit there and eat their fish and bread, and they weren't even thinking about it. 5,000 men plus women and children. There could have easily been 10,000 people present. Now, one thing that's interesting is that by the end of this chapter, one of the 12, maybe more, at least one of the 12 gets saved. And they're like, all right, I'm convinced this is Messiah. Now, the miracle might have impressed 10,000 people, I don't know. I know it impressed 12. And I don't have the time to go over it, but if I don't know if there are any math nerds in here. I was good at math. I liked math. You all know I can't. My English composition is atrocious. I can't spell words greater than 3 letters. But math always was interesting to me. Do you know that if you took the 12 disciples and you had each one of those 12 get one person saved, and then the next year you had 24, and that year each of them got one person saved, and then you had 48. And do you know how long it would have taken to see the entire world saved? The disciples wouldn't have even died. We don't need an army of hundreds of thousands of Christians to see the whole world saved, to see the whole world changed. We literally need 12 people to do what God said. If every one of us was just serious about getting one person saved, getting them to church, getting them a Bible, teaching them to read the Bible and to start becoming a Christian and acting like a Christian, and then teaching them how to teach someone else how to get saved, if we just took that seriously, before all of us were dead, the entire world would be saved and Jesus would be here. Those are the numbers. My point is, Jesus didn't need to inspire 10 or 12,000 people. He just needed these 12 to get going. By the way, every one of us here today who is born again is saved because of those 12 and the ministry they had. That's how it worked. All right, any questions before we read verses 22 to 33? Okay, feeding of the 5,000. Let's go on to walking on water. Let's read verses 22 to 33. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled. I bet. They were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth thou art the Son of God. All right, so walking on water. We've all heard this story. It's not a new one. Feeding of the 5,000. That wasn't a new one. Jesus sent away the disciples in verse 22. He did not go with them. Jesus also sends away the multitudes. So Jesus tells the 12, get in a boat and head on over to the other side of the sea. Verse 23. Jesus needed time alone. Why? I didn't hear you. Sorry. He needed help. You're right, George. He did need help. Why? Yeah, what do you think? He was 100% human. And Jesus needed time alone with the Father. And he explains that to us because we need time alone with the Father. Can I confess something? I struggle with getting time alone with the Father. And every pastor I've spoken to, this is me trying to justify how lousy of a Christian I am. Every pastor I know struggles with this, and here's why, okay? Every day I spend time in the Bible with my wife and kids. We get together, we read the Bible together, we pray together, okay? We do that, through the week. Every week I spend a whole bunch of time reading and studying the Bible in preparation for preaching the Bible, being a pastor at church. Neither of those count. Neither of those are time for Patrick to be alone with the Father. So I put this time in as Patrick, the father and the husband, which is not easy to do. There is always lots of stuff going on. It is hard to set aside the time. It is hard to be consistent. It is hard to, wrangle the kids. And then I put in, many, many hours of study and Bible reading as Patrick the pastor every week. But if I don't put in Bible time and prayer time as Patrick the Christian, then my job as Patrick the father and husband and as Patrick the pastor are just not as effective. God needed time alone with God. Any Christian who comes to me and talks to me, if it's not about, marriage counseling, I'm always trying to get people to spend 5 or 10 minutes alone with God every night. I can't count the number of times I've told people, I say, look, you want to change your life as a Christian, it takes this much effort. This much. Take a walk for 10 minutes every night, leave your phone at home, and just talk to God. Walk around the block, walk in a field, walk wherever you want. I used to live downtown in Grand Junction. I was pulled over by the police a dozen times because I was out at night walking down the middle of a road. Now, I would walk down like 11th Street or something where there's a stop sign at every block, so no cars were coming, and it was quiet. And I don't know why, I just didn't feel like walking on the sidewalk. I don't have an answer. And I'd be walking, and I'd be standing there just looking up at the sky, talking to what looked like myself, and then red and blue lights would appear behind me. And that has happened a bunch. Okay? Don't worry, you will not go to jail. So I tell everybody, look, just spend 10 minutes a night with God by yourself. It will change your life as a Christian. I had Joe Rogan changed my life years ago. I don't remember who he was talking to on his podcast. If you don't know who Joe Rogan is, that's okay. Go back to the cave you live in. It's fine. Okay, he's the most popular, he's the most famous podcaster in the history of the world. He has the biggest show. That guy makes more money. I could not count as high as the number of dollars this guy makes. He was also a comedian. He was big in MMA. And so anyway, I don't remember who he was talking to, but he was interviewing someone, and they got on the topic of physical fitness. And one of the things he brought up is he says, so many men in this world have no idea how easy it would be to change their life. He said, get up every morning. He says, do 100 push-ups, do 100 body weight squats. He says, it'll take you 10 minutes. He said, 5 sets of 20. That's it. He says, you don't have to go to the gym for hours and hours and hours. You don't have to change your life and your diet, and you don't have to make all these radical changes. He says 10, 20 minutes a day. That's it. He says, after you're done brushing your teeth, 5 sets of 20 push-ups, 5 sets of 20 body weight squats. He says, you will not believe how good you will feel by the end of week 2. He says, you don't have to start with 100. You can start with 20. And then when you feel good, you add another 20. He says, it will change your life. I went home and I was like, I can do that. I got 20 minutes. It changed my life. You cannot imagine how good you will feel. Your back and your knees and everything feels amazing. And what's crazy is when you start doing positive things in your life like that, it's contagious in other parts of your brain. All of a sudden, another part of your brain is like, man, I should probably, drink a little bit more water. I should probably eat a little bit less sugar. I need to get some bad influences out of my life. I'm going to stop hanging out with Nick Kettle so much. I just got to make some change. All of these different areas, you just start making changes and your life gets better and better and better. It was a change this big. What I'm telling you is, as a Christian, it's a change this big to change your life where you will feel like a great Christian by just putting in that much effort. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Who doesn't have 10 minutes? I don't know where we were. Jesus went on a mountain to get 10 minutes alone with God. Okay? He had to do it. I have to do it. Now, with that being said, friends, I want to make sure we're all clear about this. I understand how hard the Christian life is. I am not saying it is easy. It is not easy. It is simple. It ain't complicated. Any idiot can do it. But it's not easy. It takes effort, it takes energy, it takes time, it takes discipline. The only thing I'll tell you is it's like doing push-ups. They get a lot easier if you do them every day. Okay, verse 24. The ship is in trouble. The word the Bible used is tossed. Anyone here in the Navy? Any Navy people? Okay, yep, we have one. You ever been on a ship that was tossed? So let me tell you, that is not a comforting feeling. I've been on big boats and small boats and big ships and small ships. I have never been on one that I would say was tossed. I do not want that experience. Now keep in mind, these guys were not comfortable. In verse 25, it says, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out onto them walking on the sea. Anyone know what that means, fourth watch? The Jews broke down the evening into 4 watches. First watch was 6 to 9 p.m. The second watch was 9 p.m. to midnight. Third watch was midnight to 3 a.m. Fourth watch was 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. What that tells us is that they had been out there in the storm for a while. It doesn't take that long to get across the Sea of Galilee. You can see the other side when you're standing on the shore. It's not a sea, it's a lake. It is 8 miles across. You could swim it if you were in decent shape. Okay? It doesn't take a long time. They were out there all night being tossed around by these waves. Verse 26. They were troubled. It doesn't surprise me that they were afraid. They were probably already exhausted. Verse 27. What does Jesus say? Jesus immediately calms them. Be not afraid. It is I. Now in verse 28, this is when the story gets interesting. If Jesus came walking on the water out to the ship that you were in that was getting tossed about with the waves, what do you think most people would say to Jesus when he approached the ship? Okay? I think most people would invite him into the ship. Like, hey, we're in a boat. It's got to be better than, walking on, come on in the boat. Like, we feel safe in here. Right? There's a storm, there's waves. You feel safer in a boat than out of a boat. Peter doesn't ask him to get into the boat. Peter asks if he can get out of the boat. So Peter asks if he can climb out. What is Jesus' response in verse 29? Come on! Come on in. The water's fine. So in verse 29, Jesus says, yeah, come on out. And Peter climbed down out of the ship, and he walked on the water, going to Jesus. So it all seems pretty good. At first, it's all going well. And then in verse 30, Peter begins to sink. Why did Peter begin to sink? Okay? Says he lost faith. I agree. Why did he lose faith? Yeah. And if his eyes are on the storm, that means his eyes are no longer on Jesus. He got out. Jesus said, yeah, come on out. He gets out. He looks at Jesus, starts walking to Jesus. Halfway to Jesus, I don't know how far he was. It doesn't say how far away he was, but it was a couple of paces at least. So he's a few steps out, and all of a sudden, the boat is back there, and Jesus is over there, and I'm in the middle of, mayhem. Let's add thunder and lightning to it, just because, paints a good picture. Okay, but it was uncomfortable where he was. Can we agree on that? So he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and all of a sudden, blub, 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 starts sinking. I don't know how fast he started sinking. It seems like he started sinking slowly. At least that's the way it looks like when I read it. It seems like cartoon-level quicksand sinking, right? Not like it's not like he stepped off the edge of a cliff and just bloop right down. Okay, he started to sink. So now the water's up to his ankles and his shins, and he's still going down. And I mean, it would look silly, but would he be doing the trying to step back up on the water thing? I don't know. But what does he do at that point? You got it. So, I mean, this message writes itself. If Peter was looking at the wind and waves, he wasn't looking at Jesus. And when we are going through storms in our life, we're fine until we take our eyes off of Jesus. When we focus on our surroundings instead of Jesus, things get scary. Peter begins to sink. Verse 30 says he was afraid. Okay, so here's a question. What is fear? How do you get fear? Where does fear come from? Okay. What's that? Okay, that's a common answer. Okay, the most common answer we hear in Christianity is that fear is a lack of faith. Anyone ever hear that? Okay, whoever told you that was wrong. But I see where they get it. Fear is not a lack of faith. Fear is way too much faith in me. It's not a lack of faith. Do you know where faith comes from? Faith comes from God. God says that he bestows on everyone a measure of faith. We get to decide what we're going to put that faith into. Now, our faith can grow. It can get stronger. It can get bigger. The Bible uses those words, and it talks about how. But we get fear when we have way too much faith in ourselves instead of God. You want to know why faith in ourselves makes us scared? Because I don't know if you're anything like me, but I can mess up a rock fight. So I know that about myself. So if we do it Patrick's way, that's scary, because it's probably not going to end real well. That's why the way to peace is actually putting ourselves under an authority and doing it their way. See, we stop getting scared when we stop doing things our way and we start doing it the way of the authority we put ourselves under. Best authority we can put ourselves under is the Word of God. We put ourselves under God's authority and we say, you know what, I'm going to do it God's way, and we feel safe. We feel comfortable. Do you know, they've studied it for hundreds of years, and you want to know what makes children feel safe? Rules, discipline, a schedule, a bedtime, consistency, getting spanked. Yeah. That's what makes kids feel safe when they're under an authority, because with that authority, there is trust there, and they know that the authority loves them. Remember, God says that the chastening of the present time is, doesn't feel all that great. It's not all that exciting. Okay, but it's good, and we know it's good because God has good plans for us. Okay, so Peter, started looking around, and he's like, oh no, what am I going to do about this storm? Started transferring faith from Jesus to himself, and it fell apart. Do you know how fear goes away? God hath not given you the spirit of love, but of power and of love. God hath not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. I think it's 1 Timothy 1:7. It might be 2 Timothy 1:7. The way you get rid of fear is you make a gratitude list. What you do is you wake up in the morning and you write down 5 things that you are grateful for. 5 things that God gave you, God provided, that you are grateful for. Then you do it the next day. Then you do it the next day. Now, every day you got to come up with 5 different things. You're never allowed to put the same thing on there twice. And you say, oh, how am I going to do that? You could do that for years, and you will never need to repeat anything. And see, at the end of the first week, you're like, wow, you know what? God's been coming through and providing all this stuff for quite a while. And the next week, you're like, holy cow, I can't believe all these things that God has provided for me that I just take for granted. And by the end of the month, you're like, there's nothing to be scared of. God's been taking care of me every day, my entire life. I have no reason to think he's going to stop tomorrow. And fear can go away. You want to know another way? Now, and this is off subject. Do you know that you can also buy your fear? I heard someone talk to me about, I'm scared about getting old. I'm scared I'm going to get old and I'm not going to have anything, not going to be able to work anymore. You're scared about getting old? You can buy your fear. It's called the Roth IRA. You can buy your fear for $500 a month. Start today. And when you're 60 years old, you got nothing to be worried about. You don't have to be worried about being broken down and crippled and alone and not being able to take care of yourself because you're a millionaire. You can buy your fear. All right. Let's see. Okay, when Peter needed help, verse 31. When Peter needed help, did Jesus wait to help him? Nope. I am so glad my oldest son Moses is not Jesus. Because his sense of humor is such that he would have waited for his brother. Okay, he would have held his hand just out of reach. Come on. Come on. And he would have been down, down, down. Bubbles would have come up, and then he would have grabbed him. Jesus didn't do that. Verse 31, what does it say? And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him. Jesus was there immediately. Many times we will worry about things coming in months or years. You ready for this? Worry is a waste of time. Now, worry and planning are different. Understand that, okay? Planning is not worry. Okay, worry is what you do in the absence of planning. We will worry about things that are coming down the pipe 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years from now. It's a waste of time. When did Jesus come to the rescue for Peter? The moment he needed it. Again, I don't... Sorry, I didn't wear my watch. I have no idea what time it is. I don't know if I'm late. Okay, so I only have one or two more verses to go over. We'll be done in a minute. When Joanna and I first got married, what was it, like 3 months into our marriage and I quit my job and started my own business? I have been self-employed from that time until this time. So we've been married 18 years. What's today? Is it July yet? It's June. So this month, just a couple weeks ago, we had our anniversary. 18 years, I've been self-employed. People who are not self-employed think that self-employed people have the great faith or like we're not scared of the unknown. And that's not the case at all. People who work for an employer, big company, benefits, right? One of those great companies. 401k matching, all the great stuff. Everyone thinks like this is steady, this is safe. Okay, everyone that worked at Enron thought the same thing. It can be over just as fast as I can wake up on a Monday morning not knowing what I'm going to do on Friday. And for 18 years, there were so many times when literally it was Friday and it's like, okay, we're starting the weekend, and I get home from work and, we're having dinner and talking, and the little kids are there. Joanna's like, hey, what are you doing, next week? And I'm like, I don't know. Because the calendar's empty. I have absolutely no idea. So from Monday until when I die, I have no work as of now. And then by Sunday night, the whole next week would be full again. And you do that again and again and again. You just never know what you're doing. You have to get used to it to a point where you say, look, God doesn't need to fill my calendar for the next 3 years. I only need work today. Jesus reached down and grabbed Peter right when Peter needed help. Jesus told them to get in the boat. He did not say to Peter, by the way, in 6 to 10 hours from now, I'm going to be there for you when you start to sink into the sea. He didn't tell him that. When there was trouble, he was there. And we get all hot and bothered because we don't know what is coming around the corner, what's going to happen next week. I got this thing coming up in several months. Oh, my company's merging with this other company. I might lose my job by the end of the year. All right. Well, then God doesn't need to provide you with a new job until the end of the year. And that's frustrating. It's nice when God, provides everything you need a couple weeks out. He doesn't do it for me much, but he does it every day. So the wind stopped in verse 32 as soon as they had Jesus with them. Isn't that neat? As soon as Peter and the 12 stopped focusing on the storm and they had Jesus with them in the boat, so now the focus is on Jesus, the storm stops. Now, I've explained this before, and some of you, argue the point and think I'm crazy because the Bible is not explicit. But I'm telling you, this is, don't believe me, go home and do your own homework. When you read through the book of Jonah, you had this boat full of professional seamen. They lived on the seas and the oceans on boats. And they were all convinced they were going to die. The storm was so bad. And they knew Jonah was the problem. And they said, this is what we got to do. We got to pitch him overboard and we're going to live. Okay? And these guys pick up Jonah. They are on the precipice of the boat just coming apart. And in my mind, the way I read the story is they pitch Jonah overboard, and boom, the second they let go, bathtub calm, clouds part, sun is shining, birds are chirping, and by the time Jonah hits the water, it is dead calm. And that's what I think happened here. Jesus steps into the boat, and boom. The storm didn't slowly fade away. It was a supernatural occurrence. And it was another proof for them. It was such a proof that what is the very next thing they say? Verse 33, then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. Someone got saved. I think one of them said, I was on the fence. I thought this might be Messiah, but I get it now. This is him. He's the guy. All of a sudden, it just clicks. All of a sudden, I think it just made sense for someone. Okay, any questions? And we're going to be done. Now, for next week, this is your homework assignment, should you choose to accept it. Verses 34 and 35 are special because it is the end of a story that we read about earlier in the book of Matthew. So I want you to go home and figure out what verses 34 and 35 are the end of the story. It is the end of a story. I want you to tell me what story that is. Send me a text or an email, or give me a call and say, Patrick, I found it. Okay? This is the end of these two verses could be used as a whole message because it is the conclusion of a story that was started somewhere else. And I'm not going to tell you the chapter. I want you to look it up. I mean, nowadays, how hard is it? You could literally, hey, Google, my pastor asked me about Matthew chapter 14, verses 34 and 35 and 36, and how that is the conclusion of a story told earlier in the book of Matthew. Please find it for me now. and write a paper that I can copy and paste that sounds like me so my pastor thinks I'm smart. Go. I'm pretty sure you could do that exactly and you'd get what you want. Okay, any questions and we're done? No? Yes, sir.
Why do you start sinking in the water?
I think Peter started sinking in the water because he got afraid, because he took his eyes off of Jesus, and he was no longer focusing on him. He was scared of the surroundings.
People say that he sank because he didn't have faith. He had faith because he got out of the boat.
He did. He absolutely did. As a matter of fact, Peter had faith that nobody else had. Other people might have believed, yeah, sure, we can walk on the water, but Peter was the only one that exercised his faith by stepping out of the boat. But what it goes to show us is that we can lose our faith just as easily as we get it. When we trust in okay, so think with me here. How many times have we been concerned about, so talking to the fellas, how many times have we been concerned about money? We're like, oh man, I don't feel, it's not working out. We're not going to make this. We're not going to do that. And then it works out. Great. Praise Jesus. How long is it until that happens again? Right? Now, we had faith after that event happened. We're like, look at that. God came through. Praise Jesus. Okay, but we don't walk around with our hands up in the air for the next 3 weeks. Okay, we go back to life, and then when the bank account starts getting empty, we start getting scared again. We can hold on to that faith, we can feel good about it, and then we can be like, all right, God, I got it. I'm good. And we just turn it right back over because we're in control. And then we get scared and we're like, okay, I need some of that faith back. And I think Jesus was just trying to teach us that lesson and using Peter to do it. Because, like he said, he was afraid, began to sink, cried to the Lord, and the Lord saved him. So again, it was faith, it was fear, it was back to faith again. So I think that was the point of the story. Yeah. Good question. Noah, what you got? That's all right. We love that stuff here. Wait. I got a tinfoil hat in here. Let me get it out. No, go ahead. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Leviathan. Yep. Mm-hmm. He was conquering the God of this world. Yeah, I never heard of that. If you find it anywhere legitimate, like anywhere on the internet, send it to me. I'd love to hear that. That's good. Okay, any other questions? Any additions or corrections? Okay, Ed, would you be so kind as to close us in a word of prayer and we'll be out.